Hello, welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. I am Willie Bragg, and I'm here to discuss some politics with you. If you're not familiar with Batya Ungar-Sargon, she is an American journalist and author. She's the former opinion editor for the Forward magazine and a deputy editor, opinion editor for Newsweek. She's written for Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, Foreign Policy, the Daily Beast, the New York Review of Books. So she's got a kind of a resume behind her. I really didn't know that much about her until a few days ago, and I confess that I really still don't know that much about her, except what I discover in one of her commentaries at a national conservative conference. She spoke on Bill Maher as well, and she said something mighty similar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you from the National Conservative Conference, what she talked about, which she talks about journalism, and I have some words to share momentarily. I have some words to share about that afterwards. Hold on here. We'll get started here. I'm going to put it on fast speed, so I will not try to take up too much of your time. We all got valuable time. So give me a moment here. I'm going to put it at 1.25. If I have to put it a little bit faster, I will. So you've been warned. Okay, let's get started. Oh God, the commercials. Okay, you make it do your thing. Yeah.
The problem, as I see it, with today's left is that though its members and avatars still see themselves as on the side representing the oppressed or the downtrodden, they have developed an aversion to the idea of the common good in the name of that representation. There has been a mass withdrawal from any recognition that something unites all Americans. There's no sense of any kind of responsibility or what Yoram calls bonds of mutual loyalty towards people who vote a different way or think a different way or don't identify with the highly specialized and often counterintuitive ideas and language coming out of the university about race and gender.
Okay, I want to stop right there right now because I have something to say about that. Already I'm hearing is let's go and shit on the left. This is the sort of thing I hear from the Dave Rubins of the world, the Tim Pools of the world, and lately from the Bill Mahers of the world. And it looks like he's doing that. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what it looks like. So let's continue.
Of course, both sides have this problem today. Both left and right sacrifice an attachment to the common good to wage culture wars.
Very true. Very true. But when they say both sides, it's usually let's go and diarrhea on the left and kid gloves on the right. That's usually the way it works out.
A moral panic about race on one side and owning the libs on the other side. But I'm sure that someone at this excellent conference will take the right for sacrificing the working class on the altar of owning the libs, so I'll spend most of my time on the left where I'm coming from. 50 years ago, the left was the side of the working class, the side of labor. The Democrats were the party of the people. Today, they are the party cheering on the mass firing of working class Americans, many of them working class people of color, for refusing a vaccine.
The Democratic Party's been hijacked maybe by overzealous woke people, but even then, the Democratic Party has also been hijacked by people who has turned the Democratic Party away from being a labor party and turning it into America's second conservative party. This country is so far to the right that she thinks that the Democratic Party is a far left party today, and that the Republicans are somehow sensible. Bullshit.
The left was the party that could rely on the votes of welders and linemen and factory workers. Today, it's the party demanding those people pay off $50,000 of the student loans of dentists and accountants and lawyers. Once the left was on the side of limiting immigration to protect working class jobs and establish a wage floor. Today, they're the side that calls you racist if you don't support open borders. The focus.
Yeah, maybe so. But on one side, you have you will have the Democrats or liberals or progressives saying that you're a racist if you don't support open borders. But on the other side, when it comes to the Middle East politics, if you dare talk about equality for Palestinians, you're called an anti-Semite. You're called a Jew hater. So what the fuck is that about? Or is that's off limits? I get it. That's off limits, right? I get it.
Focus on the dignity of labor and those who perform it has been replaced by a left that is now obsessed with identity, especially with gender and race. A moral
identity politics. What the hell was Donald Trump doing in 2016? Donald Trump was campaigning on identity politics. I mean, I'm not going to go as far as say that he is a white nationalist like some over-the-top liberals might claim. But what I do think Donald Trump was trying to do, he was sending dog whistles. Those dog whistles were no different from the dog whistles of Mitt Romney or John McCain or George W. Bush or Bob Dole or George Herbert Walker Bush or Ronald Reagan, all the way back to the Southern strategy of Richard Nixon. No different. I mean, they're pretty quiet and all of that. It might not even be personal, but it's a way to go and garnish votes, and that's a form of identity politics. Going out there, talking about Bubba in Mississippi, trying to go and convince them that the black man's trying to go and get a free handout and busing and shit like that. Or even in 1988 with the Willie Horton ads, and my goodness, the furlough program, Michael Dukakis is going to let all the black people out of prison and scare all the white people. That was a form of identity politics. They wouldn't exactly say that, but that's what they were implying. That's exactly what they were implying.
Panic around race diffuses our institutions from the media to academia to the entertainment industry to corporations. And as I argue in my book, Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy, these two aspects of left-wing culture, the abandonment of the working class and a moral panic around race, go hand in hand. The result of a status revolution among America's highly educated liberals, many of whom are now in the elite, including the vast majority of America's journalists.
Yeah, and a lot of the right-wing journalists and a lot of right-wing commentators and a lot of right-wing media people also go to affluent universities and colleges too. Yet they end up sounding like dumbasses.
It was not always so. American journalism was born in the 19th century of a populist revolution in the form of the penny press, which was explicitly produced by and for the laboring classes. These papers were unignorable because of the hundreds of thousands of Americans who purchased them every day. After all, catering to the lower classes has the benefit of there being so many of them. And even up through the middle of the last century, journalism remained a blue-collar job, one in which a journalist was as likely to not have a college degree as he or she was to have one. This is no longer the case.
Well, it still exists, but our media is corporately owned with a corporatist agenda. And anybody who comes out there with a blue-collar, pro-working class message gets shut out of the system. I mean, it gets shut out of the system. I mean, even BreadTube, for example, people who talks about working class concerns are buried in algorithms in online, on YouTube, on other forums. It's a form of censorship. But I guess that form of censorship is okay, right? Yeah, we see.
Throughout the 20th century, journalism went from being a blue-collar trade to a highly educated caste. If a 1937 study found that less than half of journalists were college-educated and many hadn't even finished high school, by 2015, 92% of American journalists had a college degree, a number that's certainly even higher today. And college itself is no longer enough. To become a journalist today in a rapidly constricting industry, you have to go to the best colleges and take multiple unpaid internships in the most American cities, where the vast majority of journalists will remain. But journalists today are not just highly educated and much more liberal than the country at large on issues of identity. Like other highly educated liberals, they have become increasingly affluent. As the local newspaper industry collapsed in the face of the internet, it squeezed those who made it to the top 10% while dropping everyone else out. The fact that the starting salary of a digital media job is so low is not proof of the industry's egalitarianism, but of its exclusivity. Who but the scions of the wealthy can afford to live in New York City or Washington, D.C. on $35,000 a year? It's not just journalists, of course. America's 21st century economy has been a boom for the highly educated and those who thrive in a knowledge economy, even as it has sentenced working class Americans to downward mobility and stagnant wages. America's liberal and left-wing elite has become what the French economist Thomas Piketty calls a Brahmin left, after the highest class in Hindu society, the priests, who are known as Brahmins. And it is members of this elite who create the news and set policy for everybody else. You know you're dealing with Brahmin leftism instead of labor leftism when you hear about a topic that takes up a lot of time on our airwaves and gets a lot of play from the squad, but demands no real sacrifice from highly educated, affluent elites.
The squad bashing. Now, there is actual valid criticism against the squad, and the criticism against the squad is them. They do play with the culture war a bit too much, and I will agree with you with that, Karen. I will agree with you on that one. But the problem is not necessarily with regard to the squad. There are actual wonderful ideas that they should have implemented, but they're too scared to challenge. They're too scared to challenge the Democratic Party establishment, and they're scared to be called troublemakers, and they're scared to have their committee's assignments taken away from them. And even when they're so-called non-controversial, race and gender neutral, class reductionist ideas gets debated, it gets called woke. People like yourself will call it woke, and people on the actual right wing will call it woke. You can't have it both ways, sister. You can't have it both ways.
The opposite, it furthers their economic goals at the expense of the working class of all races. So, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion seminars, open borders, banning fracking, defunding the police, or forgiving $50,000 in student loans. These issues all sound...
Okay, there's no defunding of the police. There's not a defunding of the police. Honestly, I'm going to repeat again. There's been no defunding of the police. There are people out there that believe that there's no police departments in certain cities and what have you. No, there's not been any defunding of the police. It's redirecting resources, which hasn't been done enough. But there's been a lot of hype out there, and a lot of right-wing media has been focusing on it as if there's no law enforcement out there in existence. And oh my goodness, we have chaos out in the streets, and the streets in all of the American cities are being burned down to a crisp. They'll have people believing this stuff. Really, you're enabling this mindset.
Like social justice, but actually they very clearly benefit a highly educated liberal elite, literally putting money in their pockets at the expense of working class Americans of all races. And anyone who objects to this agenda is then called racist. While many in this class think they are defending minorities, the shift in priorities from labor to wokeness is also indisputably defending progressives' own bank accounts, their preference for dining out at a reasonable price, their $15 bottles of wine, their cheap domestic help. The moral panic around race and a more general obsession with what were once academic peccadillos, open borders, intersectionality, anti-racism, anti-Zionism, have provided a...
Back it up. Anti-Zionism. I know what you're implying. You're implying anti-Semitism on the left. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. And I would know this because I am a former supporter of Israel, but I've always, in my past, I did support Israel from the left. But after decades of right-wing policies and apartheid policies by the right wing in Israel, I had to kind of wash my hands and realize I could no longer support the country. So, the country somehow returns back to their socialist roots. I can rethink about my support. But, and that's something that evangelical Christians don't understand. And actually, even people on the left don't understand in that regard. But criticizing Israel and criticizing their treatment against the Palestinian people, it's not an act of anti-Semitism. It's an act of human rights. It is all about human rights. And if Israel didn't discriminate against Palestinians, then there would not be a problem. Now, in fairness, I will also say that any act of violence by those radical elements in, let's say, Hamas or Hezbollah, any acts of violence against Israelis is I also frown upon that equally and denounce it as well. But as I said, what I just said would be construed as, oh my, how dare Jew baiting, anti-Semitic. So, and this is the kind of sort of thing. And then those on the right, the evangelical Christians who sits there and talk about giving your support to the state of Israel, people like herself do not realize their support of Israel from the evangelicals is not out of love for the Jewish people, but because they want Israel and Iran to toss nukes at each other to start World War III. That's what it comes down to. I'm telling the truth here. I am telling the truth, and people don't realize these things. So anyway, let's continue.
Convenient alibi for a meritocratic elite that has benefited from America's vast income inequality and the widening class divide, but that still sees itself as on the side of the little guy, is still convinced of its superior virtue. We have an enormous and growing class chasm in our nation that it would threaten many tastemakers and lefty influencers and pundits and publishers to talk about. So we talk about race instead. We talk about intersectionality, the morally repugnant view that somehow the struggles faced by transgender billionaires, such that they are intertwined with the moral emergencies of Baltimore's inner city children, whose life expectancy is that of the Congo, who have an average.
Okay. Yeah, I know that Caitlyn Jenner is a wealthy woman. And I even know that an internet personality like Blair White is probably fairly well off. And, and I don't have a problem with them being well off, as whether they're transgender women or whether they're, whatever circumstances in life. The problem I have with your statement is that transgender women or transgender men, the transgender community, they're people too, and there are working class people and poorer people who are transgender who are being oppressed. Same thing with gays, lesbians, bisexuals too, along with African Americans, along with Muslim Americans, Latinos. Anti-Semitism is still a damn thing in this country too. Don't get it twisted; it still exists. I mean, the synagogue attacks that takes place. So, I mean, I don't know. He's at a national conservative forum. And so he had to go make a transgender remark because she can't outright gay bash and I don't think she probably has a problem with gay people. But the new envelope to be pushed is to bash the transgender community, the trans community. And that's, she put that little snippet in there.
GPA of 1.0. Instead of talking about reparations to Black Americans, which we owe and we never paid, we pay reparations to immigrants who came here voluntarily. We use trust the science as an excuse to execute whatever small businesses managed to survive the plague. We use all of our learning to silence dissent, coming up with excuses for why people who are pro-life don't deserve the right to vote.
Don't deserve the right to vote? Who's stopping people who are pro-life from the right to vote? That's a new one on me. I had not heard about pro-lifers being denied the right to vote. I have not heard that one before. I don't get that one. I know that people who believe in third parties across the political spectrum with an array of political opinions are being denied a political voice. That I do know. I have not heard of anybody that's being denied the right to vote based on their position on abortion. I know that districts are being gerrymandered to favor one political party. That's going to be the outcome in the November election, more than likely. I know that there are voter registration laws and laws in various states that's actually trying to make it harder for certain demographics, to make it harder for them to vote, that sort of thing. That I'm aware of. That's a new one on me. And regardless of what I think of abortion, I don't think that one's position on abortion should make it difficult for them to vote or not vote, or any other political issue. That I don't quite understand.
What passes for the progressive left today is essentially a platform that uses the real pain of marginalized Americans, the real ways we are still failing American descendants of slaves, for example, as an excuse to denounce America as a white supremacy and withdraw from the common good, advocating for things that most undermine the autonomy and social mobility of America.
Well, we have a criminal justice system that pretty much have continued Jim Crow. It's not outright slavery that existed up until the Civil War ended, and it's not necessarily even Jim Crow to the level that existed in the Deep South. until the civil rights movement came about. It's not even to that level, but it still exists in many levels. I mean, when you have the death penalty, for example, which I notice that you don't really address, or the fact that you have the police that in a lot of cases pull black people over while driving for simply being black. That exists with body cams and a situation where they're being pulled over, and in many cases, not even causing any trouble. And I'm noticing a lot of law enforcement people still trying to find a way to go and beat the hell out of, or even, kill innocent minorities. And that's still a thing. I wish I didn't have to say that. It doesn't help to bring that issue forward. But you know what? It also doesn't help the fact that law enforcement, a lot of people, white law enforcement, not all of them, but there's enough bad apples out there that's making it happen. That is still a persistent problem that I have to go and address it, especially when she slops out the bullshit like this. Let's continue.
Of the American working class of all races, and all of this in the name of anti-racism. The problem with this is not just that it's hypocritical or that it's morally wrong to silence the majority, to undermine the political and economic fortunes of the people we all rely on to exist.
Silence the majority. There's a lot of people being silenced. And censorship is not just on the left. It exists on the left. I address it quite a bit. But let's don't act like that conservatives, as a general rule, or the right wing, or the super, super crazy lunatic Marjorie Taylor Greene style right, are enlightened free thinkers, that they're somehow, just open the dialogue and they're so reasonable. And the purple hair 19-year-old who's very idealistic are the ones that are unreasonable. Let's don't pretend that, especially when you have various states around the country coming up with anti-protest laws. And in some states, in Florida, where there's going to be a loophole in it, where somebody could theoretically get away with murdering protesters, by if their life is in danger, supposedly, things of that nature. Or when you have almost half the states in this country basically wanting to tote people off to jail, or basically deny people the right to speak on campus, or to fine them heavily for engaging in boycotts against Israeli goods and products, and there are people in Congress from both parties with trying to do a national anti-boycott Israel act, that sort of thing. That's censorship, but I never hear the media talk about this. The same media she called anti-Zionist. Weird how it works out that way.
It's that it fundamentally undermines democracy and the stability of the body politic to have power concentrated among so few. But I can't come here and only complain about the left. The right has also been complicit in the...
Okay, you can't complain about the left. It's about time. Let's see.
So few. But I can't come here and only complain about the left. The right has also been complicit in the downward mobility of working class Americans. With a lock on a working class audience abandoned by the liberal media since at least the 1970s, conservative media has satisfied itself by covering trumped up culture wars instead of agitating for economic mobility and stability for a downwardly mobile middle and working class, using conservative values to unite rich and poor, in other words, to abandon the poor. And now it seems to me that the right has learned the wrong lesson from the Trump era. The lesson Trump taught us is that there is a hunger for economic populism on the right. Working class conservatives want an economy that works for them. They see through the trickle-down nonsense that they're fed by their politicians and media. They want dignified work, dignified jobs. They want an active role in building up this nation. And in exchange, many want universal health care, a child tax credit, even a $15 minimum wage, as we saw here in Florida in the 2020 election.
Okay, this might have been the most true thing she said in this, what will be a 10-minute and 29-second speech that she gave. This might have been the most truthful thing. That in 2016, Donald Trump did offer something different than your business as usual Republicans. He did offer some populism, protecting American jobs. He almost borrow some concepts from the Bernie Sanders playbook on populism. Almost. I'm not saying they're alike. I'm just saying there was some overlapping themes: protecting American jobs, income inequality, healthcare, things that Hillary Clinton couldn't be bothered about, and that people who voted for Obama twice gave Donald Trump the time of day in this election in 2016. And the thing about it is that Donald Trump really downplayed the culture war in 2016 in the way that most Republicans don't in most elections when running for president, especially in the lower offices. So, but unfortunately, in the year 2020, Donald Trump reverted back to doing what Republicans do, and that is to not talk about economic inequality, but go into the culture war bullshit. And the culture war bullshit is a non-starter for me. I think that whatever good that Donald Trump might have possibly had, you can't do it. Just as Bernie Sanders and the squad can't do positive things inside the Democratic Party, same thing with Republicans. Those who are populists within the Republican Party. And I have to debate whether there's such a thing as right-wing populism or not in the context of American politics. Maybe Donald Trump is the closest thing to it. But I'm sorry. But if you're voting for Mitch McConnell, you're not a populist, supporter of populism. If you're voting for Ted Cruz, you're not a supporter of populism. If you're voting for Ron DeSantis, you're not supporting populism. If you're voting for Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, you're not supporting that populism. You honestly are not. You're voting. Culture war is not the equivalent of populism. Although if there were some economic themes that were pro-working class, yeah. Oh, don't give me this. Well, they're for small businesses. Rah, 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 rah. If all you have to offer is deregulation that harms consumers or harms workers in a factory or some kind of shop, or tax cuts for the wealthy that benefits nobody but the super wealthy themselves, or union busting, or things like taking VA benefits, Social Security, Medicare. I'm not talking about the other goodies that Bernie Sanders said. I'm talking about existing entitlement programs, VA benefits, Social Security, and Medicare, and basically means testing it. So you turn it into just another welfare program. That is not populism at all. That is not populism at all. That is just garbage, typical Republican Party politics, the kind of shit that has always turned me off from the Republican Party to begin with. So let me continue here. Hold on a second.
But instead of building on Trump's economic legacy, Republicans have snapped right back to the pre-Trump free market ideology, though now, of course, with a heavy dose of Twitter brawling, as if that...
Those Republicans were always the same Republicans. They tolerated Donald Trump, those that voted for Donald Trump, those that voted for Donald Trump. They tolerated it. But as soon as Donald Trump came in and got sworn in, he started appointing the corporatists and the neocons and all the establishment goons that made voting Republican just repulsive to begin with. I mean, of course, but the thing about it is, a lot of those folks who vote Republican, and I'm talking about populists, the Democrats can win these folks back. I mean, even if they disagree, even if these folks disagree on social issues, if the Democrats just start talking about bread and butter issues, they will go and vote for the Democrats if the Democrats would behave like a Labor Party in America instead of being to the right of the British Conservative Party. You see, in America, the Democrats are to the right of the British Labour Party. They're to the right of the British Conservative Party. And the Republican Party is not only to the right of the Conservative Party, they're probably to the right of the United Kingdom Independence Party. And almost maybe to the left of the British National Party, which is not a good place to be, people. That's not a good place to be. And that's where the Republicans are at these days. So let her continue.
That is why people turned out for Trump. To say nothing of the shameful penchant for attacking Joe Biden for making good on things Republicans themselves advocated for under Trump, most notably the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Which brings me back to nationalism. Hi. You don't sew back together the frayed fabric of American society and reinforce bonds of mutual loyalty by owning the libs, just like you don't do it through a moral panic around race. You do it with the mundane and Sisyphean struggle of giving your opponents the benefit of the doubt, by reaching across the aisle, by sitting next to people you disagree with in church and in shul, by refusing to replace spirituality and community with politics and media consumption. You do it by choosing at every moment to be a uniter, not a divider, by choosing to feel responsible for the people who have lost out where you have won, by feeling humility in the face of that disparity and doing whatever is in your power to ameliorate it and redistribute power to the people, to the least among us as much as the most. What to call this point of view? I call it populism or sometimes even socialism, but maybe it's not wrong to call it nationalism. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. You heard that and everything. As I said, it sounds like to me, she sounds like she's at this National Conservative Forum, and I'm very concerned because I think when I hear people like her talking, I get very concerned. And what I mean by that is that I start to hear 2015, 2016. I start to get memories of 2015 and 2016 again. And what do I mean by that? Well, as you all know, that hold on a second here. As you all know, here we go. Give me I'm sorry about that. Okay, give me a moment here. As you all know, Dave Rubin used to be with the Young Turks. And he left the Young Turks over political correctness and all that. And he was actually, in the early days of the Rubin Report, outside of the Young Turks. He was a Bernie Sanders supporter. Yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it? I actually still remember him as a Bernie Sanders supporter, and I confess I used to watch the Rubin Report. I used to like the Rubin Report when he was nominally liberal, and then little by little there was a progression, and his program became garbage. Again, I have said this before, and I'll say it again. I never had a problem with Dave Rubin interviewing conservatives on the show, and even being fucking polite to them. Never had a problem with it. Never. The only problem I ever had with Dave Rubin is having someone like a Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder or someone like Dinesh D'Souza on the show and saying, well, I'm a liberal, but I agree with everything you ever said, and everything that the liberals have ever said was absolute junk and dare I say evil, you know. And then I'm like, no, fuck you. Seriously, you know, and then you sat there, Dave, and you let that little squeaky Ben Shapiro put you down for being gay in your own studio at your own home when you were living in Los Angeles. I mean, you know, have some self-respect. Really have some self-respect. But Dave Rubin went and, you know, Dennis Prager paid him a lot of money, obviously. And his thing was to be the liberal that slowly converted to conservatism. And now he bashes the libs and owned the libs. He's not really owning the libs, but, you know, he grifted to the right. And I think that might be happening to her. She's taking those little baby steps right there. So, and it's a very profitable thing to do because, you know, BreadTube, he was part of BreadTube years ago. He was part of that BreadTube community, Dave Rubin. And now, I mean, he's doing very well for himself. So, it makes money, but, you know, how in the world can you live with yourself? You have Tim Pool. Tim Pool, who made a name for himself at the at what was that, the Occupy Wall Street, and the problems that arise from Occupy Wall Street, where police were harassing some of the protesters and things like that. And he started doing his online programming, and he was part of Bread too. Also supported Bernie Sanders in 2016, and then in 2020 he supported Tulsi Gabbard in the primaries, which is, it was okay, I guess. I mean, I guess it put him in the Nico House, Jimmy Dore category. But to their right, obviously, but he was kind of soul searching and wasn't not knowing which direction to go. Then he flat out voted for Donald Trump in 2020 and decided he was going to go completely in the Republican camp because it became profitable, and that's where he's at. And so he became the next wave there with Dave Rubin, and joining with up. Now, some people, people said that Tulsi Gabbard, or they will say that Glenn Greenwald, or they'll say that Jimmy Dore fits in that category. I am not prepared to say that about them. The video would be too long to start talking about those three right now. So, but I have my criticisms of them, but I mean, they all have some good points about them too. So because they have some strong good points about them, even though their bad points are controversial, I'm not going to go. It'll be too much explaining, and it would end up you'll end up losing interest in this video if I get too long-winded about it. So Bill Maher is the latest, because he went from being a Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016 to end up supporting, what's her name? What's the name of that lady? Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota, one of the worst Democrats. I mean, maybe not the absolute worst, but she was dreadful. Supported her for president. And I'm thinking to myself, what the fucking fuck have you done going from Bernie Sanders to Amy Klobuchar? I mean, that's like, I don't know. I mean, that's like going from Bernie Sanders to Hillary Clinton. I mean, she's like a likable Hillary Clinton, and that's a low bar right there. Hillary Clinton's not likable. Neither is Amy Klobuchar. It's like Hillary Clinton without the baggage. That's probably a better way to put it. And you go knock down everything that's supposedly woke this and woke that, woke this and woke that. Look, when it comes to Dave Rubin and Tim Pool and Bill Maher, and when it comes to Batya Ungar-Sargon, any talk about wokeness and political correctness and everything, is there anything that they have to say in criticism that's valid about it? Yeah. But they take it too far. They pretend they want to improve the left, and then it ends up being that they end up being the same old predictable. It ends up being the same old predictable Rush Limbaugh style shitting on the left, but done so in a sophisticated propaganda sort of way. Just beware is all I'm trying to say. Just beware of this, because that's where I think she's headed. And if I'm wrong, I stand corrected. But that's where it looks like she's headed with that. So anyway, I've been very long-winded and all that. Let me just conclude by saying that if you like what you heard, press like and comment. Comment if you disagree with what I have to say. We'll have a conversation anyway. Share this commentary and anything else I have on my channel to your heart's content. Feel free to create your own platform and utilize it, because we're the muckrakers of our time. I say that as a free speech absolutist. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and remember, we have a class war to wage. We have to fight for equality across the board. We have to stand up against military interventionism and look for peaceful alternatives, fight for free speech, and fight for freedom for the press. Because when people like Julian Assange isn't free, none of us are free. Therefore, we're all Julian Assange. And until next time, I am Willie Bragg. Let me conclude by saying to you all what I normally say. You know, you'll hear it from me again. And that is music.